Hey, this is Chad Brown with Chad Brown Law. Today I am starting what is going to be an introduction series where I go through the five-step sequential evaluation process. Basically, when people apply for Social Security disability, a lot of times they don't actually know how the government makes a decision about whether they are or not disabled. And so what I thought I would do is take some time and go through each step of the sequential evaluation process just so you can have a basic idea of how the process works. Now, I'm going to try to use my handy little whiteboard here. We'll see how that works. So the sequential evaluation process, or SEP, as it's typically referred to, has 5 steps. So let me write those down, and then I'm going to tell you briefly what they are. In later videos, I'm going to talk about all 5 of them individually so you can understand how they work. Okay, so let me take a note here. Now, whether you can read my writing or not will remain to be seen. But let's just start by looking here at the sequential evaluation process, or the SEP. So one of the things to understand is that people are placed on disability once they go through a sequential evaluation process to determine if they're disabled. So what does that actually mean? Well, one, it's sequential, which means they go through steps. There are actually 5 steps that they go through, and because it's sequential, they have to go through the steps in order. This is something that you have to understand about the process and why sometimes it can be confusing, because most people think the question really is just, can they work? But honestly, that's part of step 4 and step 5 of the process, not part of the steps 1 through 3. And so sometimes people can be confused. So let me tell you what the 5 steps of the sequential evaluation process are. So if you're applying for disability or considering applying for disability, you'll at least have some idea of what they're going to be doing and trying to make their decision. So the first thing they do is look at what's called SGA. SGA stands for substantial gainful activity. Substantial gainful activity is a working question, and it goes without saying, if you're working and making over a certain amount of money, you're probably not disabled, and that's where the sequential evaluation process starts. It starts with substantial gainful activity and whether you're working. So if you're working and making over a certain amount of money, the process stops right there and you get denied. If you're not working, or you're working and making under what the SGA number is for that year, then they go to step 2. So what's step 2? Step 2 is MDSI, which stands for medically determinable severe impairment. A medically determinable severe impairment is just a fancy way of saying, is there anything wrong with you? If there's something wrong with you that could impact your ability to work, and that impairment is likely to last for 12 months or has lasted for 12 months, then they will most likely find that you have a medically determinable severe impairment. If you don't have a medically determinable severe impairment, the process stops at step 2. If you do have a medically determinable severe impairment, then it goes to step 3. So what's step 3? Well, I wrote step 3 here. I just wrote listings. What happens at step 3 is Social Security Administration has divided your body into 14 different categories, similar to high school biology. Certain problems affect certain parts of your body, and they look at those individually. And so, for example, if you have a breathing problem, there's a set of pulmonary listings that they look at. Now, listings are very, very, very specific. In fact, most people who meet the listings end up being approved in the beginning part of the process. So if you have a listing, that is, the Social Security Congress has set out regulations that say if your breathing ability is here, or you have certain problems with your back, or your IQ is a certain score, then you're likely to be approved because you meet a listing. Now, if you don't meet a listing, it does not mean you're denied. It means they go to step 4 of the sequential evaluation process. Step 4 of the sequential evaluation process is PRW, or past relevant work. For Social Security purposes, past relevant work is work that you have done in the past 15 years, typically on a full-time sustained basis. You have to have done a job for a certain number of months, or made a certain amount of money, or worked at it long enough to have done the job. Step 4 is pretty simple. If you can do the work you've done in the past 15 years, that is, the past relevant work, well, then you're not disabled. If you can go back to jobs you used to do, then you're not disabled. But if you can't do your past relevant work, then and only then do you get to step 5, which is other work. Now, at step 5, they're looking at whether there are jobs in the national economy that you can do. It's real important here. This is not a job you want. It's not a job making how much money you want to make. It's not about whether you can get to the job. It's not about whether you have transportation. It's not about whether there's jobs in your community where you live. The question is, if there's a job that you can do on a full-time sustained basis, then you're not going to be disabled. But if you can't do any other work in the economy, then you will be found to be disabled. Now, each of these 5 steps is actually way more complicated than this. This is just really a brief introduction to help you understand that when you go to apply for Social Security disability, or if you're in the disability process now, the people at DDS who make the initial decisions, or eventually if you go in front of a judge, they're going to go through this 5-step sequential evaluation process to determine if you're disabled. And you're going to need to be able to navigate it and convince the judge to find that you either meet a listing or that you're not able to do any other work. If you can do that, you'll be found disabled. And if you can't, well, then you probably won't. So anyway, that's sort of an introduction to the sequential evaluation process and what the 5 steps are. In coming videos, I'm going to talk about each of those steps individually and things you may need to know as you're going through the process. Thanks for listening.